Right, with only a few days to go before the start of COP17, I sat down with Malcolm Gray, Portfolio Manager at Investec Asset Management, to discuss the potential impact of climate change on the platinum sector.
The climate change risks, particularly from a policy and legislative perspective, pose challenges to the platinum sector. And I think a lot of them are moving with a reasonable amount of sincerity towards addressing these. I think energy efficiency is a big issue for them, particularly given that they are underground mining, and refrigeration is a key issue, as well as the role that water plays within the platinum mining process. And they often operate in very water scarce areas. But at the same time, you know, it's not all negative. There are positives as well. Demand for platinum is very likely to continue, both in what I call the sort of pre-carbon economy and the sort of post-carbon economy. Currently, autocatalytic converters, EU regulatory changes, etc., are going to continue to demand higher percentages of platinum and palladium in autocatalytic converters, so that's positive for demand. But in the post-carbon economy, platinum plays a role in fuel cells and hydrogen catalyzation as well. So
we've just got to find an easier and perhaps more efficient way of mining the metal going forward.
Yeah.
Telecoms, quite fascinating, because we're actually starting to see IT and IT infrastructure and the advent of the internet and various other, Skype, for example, starting to change the way that people do business. And this could actually be beneficial to the environment.
Absolutely. I think telecommunications and the innovations that have taken place over the last 10 or 15 years have really given us a lot of efficiency solutions, both in terms of business travel, communication, face-to-face communications via things like Skype, for example, but also in terms of machine-to-machine communication. So creating opportunity for efficiencies, improving logistics, shortening supply chains. So telecommunications actually, in many ways, is actually a solution to a lot of the climate change challenges that we face going forward.
But you also say that extreme weather conditions can affect the reliability of IT infrastructure.
Yeah, it absolutely can. I think, given the nature of the infrastructure, it is energy. It does require energy, not to the extent that you require in many other industries, but it does require energy to operate base stations. And extreme weather events can definitely disrupt communication networks. So it is something that can hamper telecommunications as well.
Another sector that you focused on is construction, and we know that the footprint of construction in itself is quite big. We know that the carbon footprint is getting larger and larger, but we know that that is changing extensively, where we want greener buildings. Do you are you expecting more of a trend in that scenario, in that way, and that investors are opening up their appetite for more greener buildings down the line?
We've certainly started to see more greener buildings starting to come to the fore. It's certainly not a big trend in South Africa yet, but I think it's essentially a function of cost and efficiency. As costs go up, people look for solutions to those costs and efficiencies in terms of refrigeration, air conditioning, lighter building materials, more resilient building materials are all going to be part of it. So within, let's say, building construction, it's a big issue, but the construction sector as well could be quite a big net beneficiary in a major structural change that could take place in terms of, let's say, climate awareness over the next 10 years. So
I'm sure the companies, the construction companies that are starting to shift themselves more towards those kind of new technologies are going to fare better down the line.
I suspect so. I mean, you've seen some moves like, for example, Avenge, focusing on Avenge Water. People that are starting to find the opportunities within a very tough sector at the moment.
Let's touch on the food retailers, and of course food security is very important. You mentioned water scarcity in South Africa as well, but we're starting to really focus on the agricultural side of things in the country. What is your sense with regards to the overall supply chain within the food space?
Well, I think food retailers are in an interesting space because they are both a driver of potential change in terms of being able to source product in a much more efficient way and actually potentially influence consumer habits. But at the same point, they're also exposed to some of the risks that come with it in terms of higher food costs, potential margin pressures, the inability to pass those margins onto customers. People often think retailers can just pass on all the cost increases onto the customer, but the reality is there's only so much wallet available, and I think there's a lot that's going to be gained by food retailers that introduce greater efficiencies into their supply chains and introduce innovative agricultural techniques in terms of their supply chain sourcing.
Malcolm, have you already looked at certain companies that you're already starting to feel that are going to perform very well going forward with regards to climate change? And you mentioned Avenge. Any such other companies that you're looking at?
In the research piece, we don't focus on any specific companies. We do it at a sector level. But in terms of the funds that I run, absolutely we do. And a lot of the companies that I hold in my portfolios have got risks, but they've got good opportunities. So companies like Avenge, particularly, even a controversial company like Sasol is interestingly exposed in the transition that's taking place within the current climate debate. Companies like Woolworths on the retail side, who have really led the kind of, let's say, environmentally responsible shopping experience. And even in the farming sectors, companies like Tongaat and Illovo are potentially going to be beneficiaries in the long term.
In the financial space, Nedbank, for example, or not? I mean, I know that all the banks in South Africa are trying to reduce their carbon footprint.
Yeah, I think banking's one where the big issue really links to the actions that they take in terms of risk decisions. So I think banks that, and Nedbank may be one of them, but banks that are really understanding the climate risk that they're taking in terms of their long-term investment, or let's say their funding decisions, in terms of their risk co-decisions, are likely to be better positioned in terms of managing those risks.
Malcolm, just very quickly, you mentioned Sasol, and of course we have the likes of Eskom and Sasol creating the biggest carbon footprint in South Africa and perhaps the whole African continent.
Correct.
In a sense. Just give us an indication as to why you feel Sasol is part of investing responsibly from a climate change perspective, because it of course is one of the biggest emitters in South Africa.
It certainly is, and I think that within that statement lies part of the actual reason why behavioural change and looking at how Sasol can become a much more responsible corporate citizen helps us address it. They are they're the largest private sector emitter on the African continent, and if they are able to allocate their resources, their R&D and their technologies, and move towards less energy intensive, more energy efficient solutions, whether it be in the coal to liquid space, whether it be in the gas to liquid space, they can potentially reduce their emissions, and as a result be quite a net positive contributor to reducing our carbon exposures in South Africa.